from the previous episode as well, when I asked you about what you think it would be like to leave the church, and you talk about how, well, I've thought about it, and it's like, but why does your thinking have to be that you have to come out as an atheist? Why can't it just be that you come out and say, I think there's a God and I think there's morality, but I don't know that I agree with the key teachings of the Catholic Church? Why does it have to be so extreme with you?
Well, because I mean, for the church, if you're gonna believe, I mean, it would be like if I left and joined a Protestant church. Like the church directly talks about that's heretical, so it would not make sense to revert to a Protestant, because how would I justify that, right? Because the Catholic Church says directly that that's heresy, right? Whereas if I was a Protestant moving to another Protestant church, that's seen as acceptable in the Protestant world.
I don't know how true that is, but
like if you went from a Baptist to
but my thing is more like, so, but it's like, so leaving the church, you would have to just abandon everything.
Yeah, because, well, how would I justify going to a different church when I know it's seen as heretical, right? Although I guess it would be seen as heretical to be an atheist, but you get the idea, right?
I mean, a lot of other people have made that transition before.
I can't. You're kind of locked in.
No, you're mentally locked in.
And
have you watched that documentary, The Keepers?
No.
On Netflix?
No.
Oh, we should watch that together.
Oh, what is that about?
It's about a nun that gets murdered by a priest in Boston.
Oh, that was a true story.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, that's really good. But that one has quite a few people that, because of that incident, they left the church and went to, and a lot of them too didn't become atheists. They just went to Protestant churches.
Even though that's seen as direct heresy.
You realize that they were all coping with the fact that a priest murdered a nun, right?
Well, sure, but you can't justify leaving an organization because someone in the organization does something wrong.
This is another.
Right.
I don't think you really look at the world from other people's perspectives very well.
Yeah.
I think you have. And it's not easy putting yourself in someone else's shoes. I can attest to that. But it seems like you don't really make much of an effort.
Well, I mean, no, I've heard of what you're saying before, where someone gets ticked off because a clergy member did something. I've heard of that.
I mean, murder is pretty big.
But see, that's not seen as justifiable, because you have to have a problem with the larger theocracy.
So the larger theocracy moving a priest so that he doesn't get arrested by the cops and that he could get away with it, that's not enough to enrage you. And granted, I'm aware you probably weren't aware of that part of the story until I just told you right now, but which also was, as was what was going on with a lot of the priests that were pedophiles as well, is that they were being moved to other churches instead of being left to deal with the cops.
Yeah, I remember hearing about that. I meant to say theology. If you have a problem with theology, that's different than if, having a problem with a clergy or even policies, as far as the bureaucratic part, is different than having a theological problem.
But isn't that a theological issue if the organization that you put so much, that you put faith into, then, kind of erodes that faith that you have in them, this organization that is built entirely on faith?
Let me put it this way, right? Excuse me. Let me put it this way. Does Nixon's presidency lead you to believe that the Constitution is no longer valid?
How so? Why would his presidency lead me to believe that?
See, because even though he abused the office, it doesn't mean that the Constitution is false. Correct?
Yes.
So heretofore.
Wait, no. This doesn't make any sense whatsoever.
Why not?
Because they didn't try covering up his. They were very open about it, and the only reason they didn't go with the trial is, number one, because unlike with Trump, the Senate didn't go through, or well, I guess it would have been the Congress didn't go through with the impeachment afterwards, and then we found out after Trump that in fact that can still happen.
Oh,
right. And two, he had to resign, so there are still major consequences from that. He didn't get off scot-free.
Sure.
So yeah, that's true. So in a sense, even though the justice that should have been delivered was not, and that's also too why I still have faith in it, is because in a sense, even though the justice that should have been delivered was not, there was still fallout from that. Whereas for a lot of these priests, there was no fallout. They got off scot-free.
But the USCCB in 2004 or whatever passed a charter where they said now they will not tolerate accusations credible accusations.
Yeah, that's now. What
Yeah.
are you going to tell all those people in the past that have already left because of those incidents?
Well, haven't they paid out monies to those people that sued? I mean, I realize it doesn't solve what happened to those victims, but hasn't the church paid money out to those people that have asked?
Well, like you said, it doesn't change those problems. It doesn't get restored trust in the organization.
Yeah, but isn't it the same thing? That, in other words, something happened, some people abused their office, and the organization has tried to correct it now. Just like Nixon having to resign for what he did.
Oh, he also did what he resigned so that he wouldn't have to face the full brunt of his consequences.
That's correct, but he did lose. I mean, he had to voluntarily leave, or else he was going to be forced out.
Yes.
Yeah. So in the same way,
and a lot of these priests, they got to continue doing what they were doing.
Correct, but this
and
was
also too. There were a few incidents where some of them went on and committed those crimes again and just got moved again.
Yes, but this was over. What was this? Right, from the 70s to the 90s.
As I understand, that's when a lot of this stuff started being realized, but that it also could have been going on for longer.
Well, certainly not before the 60s.
You really don't think it's possible that it could have been going on since before then?
Since when?
Since before the 60s, that just suddenly in the 60s something corrupted the Catholic Church that made a few of the priests suddenly pedophiles?
Well, the sexual revolution.
So you think it was because of the sexual revolution that suddenly priests started coming out as pedophiles?
Yes. Absolutely. 100%. You don't think that's accurate?
No. Explain to me, what is the evidence there?
Well, that's when the whole society started becoming more permissive and sexually open.
That's also when sexual abuse victims started coming out more and being more open and honest, and not tolerating it.
But I don't remember hearing about anything like that in the 40s and before, at least not in the U.S.
It was also less common. Another thing that we talk about that you get angry about is no-fault divorce, but it's also more common, or not as common before no-fault divorce to not hear about things like abusive marriages, even though those were very common and what resulted in a lot of those no-fault divorces.
Oh, so you're saying that stuff might have been going on behind the scenes, but it wasn't talked about, it wasn't public.
You think that just suddenly, because of the sexual revolution, that suddenly a bunch of priests started doing pedophilia?
I'm not aware of of a lot of cases or any cases.
So explain to me how exactly the sexual revolution leads to some priests being pedophiles. Take me down this road.
Well, because the sexual revolution it created a permissive society where it started becoming acceptable of various sexual endeavors outside of traditional marriage. And so someone that's a priest,
and who in the sexual revolution was saying that you should be having sex with young children?
Well, they weren't saying that, I don't, most of the time, or at all, but I think in this case, a priest in that environment, I guess because they couldn't take a wife directly, so then I guess they start to get disjointed because they have these sexual desires that are coming from this society, and they're succumbing to them. So then they look for either other seminarians, men, or children, because they can't officially marry a wife or anything like that. So they kind of become disjointed, perhaps. I don't know psychologically why that led to that, but it's probably partly because they couldn't just have free and open relations in public. I mean they couldn't have a girlfriend or a wife or anything like that. But before the sexual revolution, they probably weren't as tempted by that because society was more puritanical and locked up, and belts were on and trench coats were on and fastened, and everyone's genitals were locked away.
And so suddenly, because of this, the only way priests could think to relieve themselves was by abusing their flock.
Again, psychologically, I don't know why it led to that extreme, but I think it's partially because they were super tempted and they wanted to engage in relations, but they had to do it secretly, and they only had access to children and to seminarians who were men.
And it has nothing to do with the possibility that perhaps in a time when people were being more open and honest about sexuality, that they were also being more open and honest about their sexual abuses.
So you're saying that it may have been going on since when?
Since who knows how long.
I have never heard that before, other than in Canada with the Native American schools, which has only recently come out that possibly, not proven, but possibly there were things going on, either abuse of that nature or physical abuse, but I don't really know much about that. And that is only recently even beginning to be looked at, and it's not even proven that that's what happened. Or it could just be that the kids got diseases and they died, and they buried them instead of giving them back to their families, and they just buried them on site for some reason in mass graves.
It seems like at every turn you just don't want to kind of admit that the Catholic Church might have had genuine follies. You know, we talk about the printing press and stuff like that, and you're like, yeah, you know, the priest was just, or the church was just slow to adopt that. We talk about the heliocentric theory, and you're like, well, you know, the church just wanted to be very careful about this guy going around telling people that the earth revolves around the sun, you know, that radical, dangerous idea. That, you know.
Well, maybe, yeah. I mean, it's not to say the church is always perfect. I mean, it's made up of humans, and humans make mistakes. So that's important, that it is, you know, it is flawed. And certainly the reason the Reformation occurred is because there was corruption in the church. But Luther, instead of reforming in the church, decided to go out and make his own church. That was his terrible sin. But he
You can check out full episodes of Kinky Caption Convos by clicking on the link in the description below, or by searching for Kinky Caption Convos through most major podcast distributing apps such as iTunes, Google, Audible, Spotify, iHeartRadio, and more. Thank you for listening to this Kinky Caption Convo clip.